your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, as we celebrate episode 60, where our category this week is Legacy of Lovecraft. And we're referring to, of course, Howard Phillips Lovecraft, prolific author from the early 20th century, who very influential from his day forward into horror, and somewhat of a controversial figure during his lifetime, and certainly since his death.
A little bit.
What's your thoughts on this category, and how familiar are you with the works of Mr. Lovecraft?
I love the category because I love weird. I love cosmic. I like the unknowable, the incomprehensible, the dread and paranoia that he's kind of developed. I've only read one Lovecraft book. It was The Lurking Fear, and I absolutely loved it. It was I really liked the way he was almost very poetic in a way, the way he would describe things. He had a great vocabulary, and I'd like to read more of his works. I know there were some books that you had gifted me of his. I still haven't got to them yet, but his style of cosmic horror, to me, it's something I really enjoy. Like when I'm in a mood to watch something that's just kind of out there, it kind of encapsulates horror in a way that that you can play with in every kind of dimension, whether it's a slasher or just some kind of thriller or a monster movie or something from space. So I think he, like, the Lovecraftian style just incorporates so much in horror that you can do a lot with it.
Yeah, the fear of the unknown is, of course, a great fear, and he, you mentioned cosmic. That was kind of a term applied to his work, is this cosmicism, and his belief that humans are an insignificant part of the universe, and there's ancient gods and monsters from space and depths of the ocean that we just don't understand, and confusion and madness and paranoia are prime in his work, and he uses a lot of descriptions like unknowable and incomprehensible, which for a long time made people think, well, how do you film something that's that's unimaginable or incomprehensible? But I would cite The Mist as an example of Stephen King trying to do a Lovecraftian tale. And I think it's telling when you have an adjective, incorporating your name into the work that really signifies something unique to you and something impressive that you've done.
I feel like there might not be any greater honor than that, right? Like when you become that adjective, when you become the genre, where you've created something so unique that you're the genre. I think that's just a great honor, and it's it's a testament to his work.
Yeah, and as always, we've run into this issue in the past. We separate the work from the man, and we're here to talk about his art and his influence in movies that were generated from the ideas of his work. We're certainly not here to endorse the human being, because all indications was he was a pretty awful human being, and with horrid ideas, and a white supremacist, and we're just talking about the art.
Yeah, and he was, he's also known to be very much a loner, someone that kind of, like, he was a hermit. In that kind of, like, if you read his work, he didn't really write any dialogue, so you can tell he wasn't really out there mingling with people a lot.
Yeah, interesting. Well, our first movie in this topic is In the Mouth of Madness, 1994, directed by the great John Carpenter, and it's kind of a take on the Lovecraft tale At the Mountains of Madness. And again, we talk about psychology and insanity being common threads in his work, and this is kind of right down that path.
Yeah, this is one movie I've always wanted to see get remade. It's been 30 years now, and as much as I love John Carpenter, it's an absolute classic. I think this movie could be remade and done really well. But in itself, the original, I do love the original.
We start with our main character, John Trent, played by the always reliable Sam Neill.
Yeah.
He's dragged fighting and screaming into a padded cell, and he has delusions. He's drawn all over himself with a black crayon, and a doctor comes in to speak with him, And here John tells his tale. And this is a familiar Lovecraft narrative device where, somebody's at a point of madness, and then we get the back tale.
Let me tell you my story type thing.
Yeah, a common framing technique he used. And they used it in the movie, same way.
Yep.
He was an insurance investigator, a very good one. And we see at a lunch, he's attacked through a window by a madman with an axe. And the police shoot the man before he's able to harm him. But he finds out that this man was the agent for missing author Sutter Kane. And Sutter Kane is a Stephen King on steroids character where they even comment, forget Stephen King, Sutter Kane outsells them all.
Yeah, it was a funny nod. Yeah.
So he's a wildly popular horror author. And Arcane Publishers they're his publishing house, and there's an insurance claim because he's missing and his last manuscript is missing. So John is tasked with finding him and the new book that's scheduled to come out. Fans that are reading his latest book called Hobbs End Horror are going mad. And there's a cool parallel when you look at all the Sutter Kane books. All of his titles are just one slight word off of Lovecraft titles.
And the imagery that they use is Lovecraftian. They use
very deep in the lore.
Yeah.
And John gets all of his books and he starts seeing a pattern in the covers. He starts cutting them out, and he ends up piecing together a map of what he's determined to be New Hampshire, with the point in the middle of where he believes Hobbs End is.
And I thought it was cool that they picked a New England town like that, because that's something Stephen King would do, and they kind of give the nod to Stephen King, and then it's Hobbs End in New Hampshire. It's very New Englandy. Yeah,
well, and all of Lovecraft's work was also heavy New England based, the East Coast, Massachusetts.
He had Arkham. He made up the whole Arkham thing. Yeah.
Yep, Miskatonic University in Massachusetts.
Arkham was in Reanimator.
Yeah, the Arkham Asylum, and I think Batman borrowed it.
They did, yeah.
So he's going to drive to New Hampshire on this quest to find the man, and editor Linda Stiles goes along with him on the search. And driving at night, they see a kid on a bike, and they keep passing him. And every time they pass him, he gets older, and they just keep seeing the same. And it's a pretty cool visual, little weird.
Yeah, the whole movie's weird.
At one point, Linda's distracted, and she's driving, and she hits him, and she runs into him. They stop and get out, and the man just gets up, and he says that he can't get out. He won't let me out, and he gets back on his bike and just keeps riding.
Yeah, some weird time loop type things going on.
Yeah. They continue on, and the road completely disappears into black, and they go through a covered wooden bridge, which a theme that was used by Joe Hill in like the Nosferatu book and TV show, where the old covered bridge is a pathway into magic, which I thought was kind of a cool idea.
Yeah.
And as soon as they go through it, boom, it's daytime. And they're at the town sign for Hobbs End, a town that exists on no map of New Hampshire. The town seems empty, but Linda sees some kids and a dog running around, and then they turn around and they're gone. They're just looking around, but they're not seeing anything. They go to an old hotel, and Linda points out that this is the exact hotel that exists in the book. And an old woman is there and checks them in. And in the book, she's mad and has eaten her husband. And he's like, no, she's a sweet old lady. That's just fiction.
Yeah.
But they quickly see the picture in the lobby starts to move.
And it's freaking her out. And Sam Neill's like, calm down. Yeah.
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 Strange things abound. And Linda, at this point, is considering that the things Kane wrote about may be real, which John dismisses as just completely ludicrous.
He's the one maintaining composure and rationale, like for most of the movie. Right.
And he's a top-notch investigator. He figures things out.
Yeah.
Nothing's what it seems. There's truth behind everything.
He sees through BS real quick. Yeah.
That logic base is really ingrained into who he is as a person. So he can't dismiss it and just say, well, this must be just fantasy.
Yep.
Outside their window is a huge church that was described in the book. And it's shiny, new, monolithic. It's completely out of place in this old New England town. And they go to it, and a scene plays out in front of the church with locals arriving with guns. And then Cain himself, Linda identifies him, opens the doors to the church, and attack dogs come out. And there's this whole scene of locals being attacked by dogs. And Linda and John have kind of slid to the side and watched it all unfold. And John is buying none of this. He's like, look, this is a publicity stunt.
Yeah.
You knew he was here all along. And Linda actually admits that Cain scheduled to disappear was a publicity stunt.
Yeah, he was like, if anyone find, like I find the golden ticket kind of thing. Like if you find him, you'll get this reward. And like he thinks it's this whole thing to sell the books, and he's like, I'm not buying it. Yeah.
So she admits there was a publicity stunt planned, but he never showed up, and now he's missing for real.
Yeah.
Which just John's like, yeah, that sounds like crap to me.
Right. He's like, I think you guys are trying to get some money out of this, and it's fraud. Yeah.
She tells John she's very worried because his new book, In the Mouth of Madness, which is not out yet, but was promised at the back cover of the Hobbs End.
And that's what they're looking for. They want their property, right? They're
Yes.
like,
It's going to be a huge seller.
Yeah.
She tells him that book, she's now starting to believe that what he writes is real. But that book details the end of the world beginning in Hobbs End. So she's concerned that that's what's going to happen. They argue over it. She leaves, and she goes to the church where she finds Sutter Kane, and he shows her his work. He's like, it's finished. Look here. And just by glancing upon it, her eyes bleed. She's like now completely disoriented. He tells her it's all real, and they've been talking to me all along, telling me these stories to write.
Yeah. And she almost goes like comatose or something like that. Like she's just like possessed. Yeah.
It's funny. It kind of ties into the all horror authors always talk about when they have like public Q&As or meet and greets. They always get the question, where do your ideas come from? Well, here's a horrible answer that they come from these devilish, demonic creatures that you would never believe exist.
Well, it's an interesting idea because in the creative realm, they often talk about like channeling the muse, right? Like the muse will show up if you just have to kind of sit down and put the work in, and that there is this thing called the muse that will kind of channel ideas to you, right? Like because oftentimes when you do ask creative people where they get their ideas, they don't know.
Sure.
They're trying to work that out themselves. Like, I don't know where I got this idea. It just came to me. You know what I mean? Like, and people who are trying to learn to be creative, that's not an acceptable answer. Like, no, there's got to be some kind of formula I can do, right? And creative people are like, I don't know. It's just coming to me, right?
Yeah.
So to take that idea and say, hey, it's coming from demons. I think it's fun. Yeah.
Like, oh, that's not the answer I was looking for.
No.
Linda makes her way back to the hotel where she tells John not to read the book and don't let the world see it. At this point, the old lady at the hotel and Linda both start to transform into very Lovecraft-like, cosmic, indescribable creatures. In fact, the old lady turns into like an inverted spider type of thing in the basement. And the effects were done by KNB. And it falls right in that timeline that we've talked about before, where a lot of practical effects from the 80s were moving into the CGI digital age, and the 90s were kind of a mishmash combination of the two. CGI from the time was pretty weak, and you end up with some messy looking things in the 90s, in my opinion.
When I watched those early 90s graphics special effects that they did, it's almost like going back and watching a Sega Genesis video game and looking at the graphics compared to how things are now with like an Xbox. You're just like, oh man.
Yeah, gotcha. That's a good analogy. You go back to way back to like the Atari 2600, and it's all blocks.
Yeah.
And
And
now
right
you
now
see, you know,
in the 90s, yeah, they're at that 1632-bit. Like that's kind of where they were with some of the stuff.
John at this point takes off. He drives away, but the streets are blocked by kids and locals dancing in a chanting circle around Linda. And he goes and he actually hits Linda because she's almost comatose, like in a trance.
Yeah.
He puts her in the car and drives away. He thinks he's trying to save her. Um, he drives by the old man on the bike again and is end up back at the crowd. No matter which way he drives, he ends up back at the same place.
It's kind of building on that madness, that unknowable madness part of that Lovecraftian madness. Like, where am I? It's time loop, you know.
Yeah, he keeps trying to get away and he can't. So this time he decides, I'm driving through the crowd, and he goes forward and ends up crashing. And then he wakes up locked in a confessional. And he's inside the church, we figure, and Sutter Kane is on the other side, and they have a philosophical conversation about the power of the written word. And Kane tells him that more people believe in his work than the Bible,
Yep.
and that their belief is powerful and will open the doors for the old ones to return. And that, again, that's very Lovecraftian, the ancient beings, the ancient ones. And it's very non-specific, but he gives him, he says, I'm going to give you the manuscript to give the world. And at this point, he tells John, I wrote you into existence.
Yeah. But this was like the peak of the movie where I was just like, wow. Like
John,
this is where
of
it
course,
gets good.
I know who I am. I know what I am. That logic driven, everything's fact based type of personality is a ridiculous concept to accept.
Yeah, and now he's dwindling into dread. You can see, and Sam Neill is such a great actor. You can like see the look in his eyes. He's like doubting everything. Like, wait, what are you saying to me? It was a really good scene.
We see he gets out of the confessional. We see the interior doors in the church are kind of bulging and bursting, and we hear noises and slithering. And again,
Doors
it reminds me of The Mist.
Yeah.
But there's creatures at the door, and they want through. And at this point, Sutter Kane goes to the wall, and he tears a hole as if he's tearing it in paper, and folds himself in and disappears.
Now, the concept of this was awesome, but again, it goes right back to those early 90s special effects where it just looks so dated. And that's why earlier I was saying this would be a great movie to remake. Because as much as I love the movie, I think it could be done way better with what they can do now.
Yeah, I totally agree with that point for sure. John goes and looks through the hole that was created, and at the same time, Linda's there, and she's reading from the manuscript describing exactly what John is doing as he's doing it. And it reinforces the idea of him being a character written into this book. And the creatures still are bursting at the door, and they make it through, and he manages to run away being pursued by these beings. And I was actually reading an interview with John Carpenter where he talked about the KNB people, and he talked about that very concept of you got to make creatures that are indescribable. It's an impossible task. And they actually had a very brief period of time. I think they had like 30 days to get all the creature effects done. So they were really under the gun.
They're probably working 18-hour days. Yeah, can imagine.
Yeah. So he runs away, pursued by the creatures, and he wakes up in the middle of a rural street. And the manuscript is with him.
Middle of the day, looks like he's like in Ohio or something. Yeah.
Yeah, just middle of very rural.
Yeah.
He walks away and he leaves the manuscript. He's not taking it. And a truck picks him up. He makes it to a motel. At the motel, there's a package there for him. He's like, wow, how could I have a package? No one knew I was coming here. It's the manuscript.
Yeah. It's got his name on it. Trent. Yeah.
Yep. John Trent. And he takes it and he takes it in the sink in the hotel room, and he burns it page by page. And he takes a bus back to New York. He goes back to the publisher, and the publisher was actually Charlton Heston, which was Like, it's just so cool when a
Just
when
a
a
random
old
Charleston
time
Heston.
legendary movie star just makes a weird appearance in a movie. But
Yeah.
the publisher tells him, "You brought back the book months ago, and I sent you on this quest by yourself. There was no Linda." And he's really starting to freak out. And he tells him, "The book's been out for 7 weeks, and the movie comes out soon."
Yeah.
And he's like, begins to panic, like, "Oh my God, this
What?
could be the
Yeah.
end of the world."
Yeah.
Outside of a bookstore, John appears, and now, as the put together, straight laced, logical man, he's now disheveled, hair sticking all over, madness in his eyes. He murders the reader with an axe, almost full circle of the axe man attacking him at the beginning.
Yep.
And this is what brings him into the custody. And now we've gone full circle to how he got grabbed and dragged into this insane asylum.
And it made me wonder, watching it. This is the second time I've seen the movie. I saw it when I was younger, and I was wondering. I was like, did he do that so he would go to the insane asylum? Like, I just want to get out. Just bring me to an insane asylum. Or was he written to do that, or did he really lose his mind? Like, you don't know, right?
You don't know. I think he was written to lose his mind, would be my guess. But
most likely, yeah.
So he finishes his story up to this point with Dr. Wren. And the doctor says, "Okay, that's interesting." And he says, "Excuse me a minute." He hears kind of, something going on outside. And when John was first brought in, there was talk about there was some kind of event going on outside. Almost, you don't want to say apocalyptic because you don't know what level it was at, but
some
something
kind of
was
riot
going on.
Yeah.
Well, now Dr. Wren goes out, and John hears screaming, shouting, and he sees shadows in the hallways of strange creatures, Lovecraftian creatures. And his door gets ripped open, and there's huge claw marks into the door. But he walks outside, and nothing's there. But the place is destroyed. Something had been through there. The people are all dead. There's nothing else going on.
It kind of gave me it kind of reminded me of like the Resident Evil, like the video games, like you start off the game and like the whole like everything's just empty and destroyed. Like something came through and just wiped everything out, and like they're kind of walking through like the town or something. It just reminded me of that.
Yeah. He walks outside, and the whole world is that stereotypical apocalyptic, like nobody's around, cars are wrecked on the side of the road, and he's just wandering around by himself. And he walks up and sees a movie marquee showing In the Mouth of Madness, starring John Trent, and there's a picture of him showing on like the movie display. And he walks into the empty theater, and he watches the events he just lived play out on the screen.
He doesn't just watch it; he has a tub of popcorn.
Yes, and he is, and this is a good actor in Sam Neill. He's watching the whole thing he just lived through play on the screen, and he's laughing, but he's also crying, and like he's showing all these different emotions. But the realization is that he's a character in a piece of fiction, nothing more.
Yeah, and so that whole world's not real. Right, like none of that's not even the real world. That's like the insane cosmic, like unknowable part of this Lovecraftian style story, which I actually love this kind of stuff.
The layer of then this means means this. You could peel that back so many different ways, but it's a very interesting concept. I think it's probably unlike any other movie I have seen.
It's very brilliant. Yeah.
Thrown off, to such a great degree, but it's and it does have its weaknesses, and I think most of that stems from probably budgetary restraints, but also technology at the time. But it's definitely got some really interesting subject to tackle.
I love the movie. I always have, and I love when a movie is so bizarre that there's no point in trying to dissect it. Just have fun with it. Right. Like at the end, it's like, who cares? Like we have this in need to like go A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
Right. Like this has to be logical. And with Lovecraft, sometimes it's like, it's not logical. It's bizarre. Yeah. Like that's the whole point.
Yeah. Unexplainable,
unknowable,
like that really complex mental gymnastics that you got
And
to
when
do.
it's done right, it's just fantastic. It's like, yeah, that's how is the movie? It's insane.
And I have to
mean?
admit, I had never
Yeah.
seen this movie before.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I was aware of it.
I thought you had.
No,
I
I had
saw it.
not seen it
I saw it
before.
as a teenager, and it just kind of that just kind of like that was kind of my thing at that age, like 17, 18. I was like, oh, bizarre, weird stuff. I was like, I loved it. So
Yeah. Okay. Our second film in the Lovecraft legacy is Suitable Flesh from 2023, directed by Joe Lynch. And this is loosely based on the story, The Thing on the Doorstep, which is a really creepy Lovecraft tale. I actually read, I had all of Lovecraft's short stories collected in small paperbacks, and I read them when I was a teenager. And you mentioned his vocabulary, and I got to tell you, the reading was very challenging because he uses a lot of big words, which is fine in and itself, but he also uses words people haven't used in 100 years. And it's it's very representative of the time, and language evolves, language changes.
yeah.
People don't talk the same way they talked 100 years ago, and I had to work to get through them, but I was glad I did.
And his books are dense. There's not a lot of dialogue. You open up the page, and it's very dense.
Yep.
Dense paragraphs.
We start with Dr. Beth Derby is locked in a psych ward and is visited by her friend, Dr. Danny Upton. And Beth recounts her story about how she got here. Again, the exact same, very familiar framing device that we just saw in this movie.
Yes.
And was
yeah.
common to Lovecraft.
And
that said, these movies are vastly different.
Very, very different. It's Heather Graham, and I'm a huge fan of Heather Graham because she does everything. She does thrillers, slashers, comedies. She kind of just does it all. I think she's a great actress.
She's Jade in The Hangover.
Yeah.
I was more excited to see Dr. Danny Upton. If you have a Lovecraft story and Barbara Crampton's in it, that's a winning combination for me.
Yeah. And the young man, I can't think of his name, but he was also in the Babysitter movies, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, he did a good job. So she tells her story to her friend, another doctor. A young man named Asa shows up at her office begging for help. Says he experienced being outside of his body, but not in the sense where you're hovering over yourself, but because someone else took it over. And she analyzes him clinically, of course, doesn't believe that story the way he tells it, and starts to try to, apply her medical experiences to what he must be experiencing.
What's interesting about the tactic that they use for this movie is multiple personality disorder, which is a very, very bizarre disorder that there have been studies, there have been cases in multiple personalities where people's eye color has changed. So they've gone from one personality to another, and their eye color would change, which is extremely bizarre, which tells you how powerful your brain is over your body chemistry. Like, I mean, that's an extreme case, but it's existed before. It's been documented. So she's convinced this is a personality disorder, right? Yeah. He has a multiple personality disorder, and that the film kind of plays on that angle.
Sure. And he tells her it's his father that he's scared of. While he's in her office, he gets a phone call, and listening to the phone, he goes into a seizure. And then once he's twisted and mangled and shaking, and it's a violent seizure. Once it's over, he's a completely different person. He's
very
now
smooth.
Arrogant.
Yeah.
He's crass. He grabs her sexually. He basically sexually assaults her.
This is a much more erotic film than I thought it was going to be.
And at this point, she, of course, thinks he has multiple personality disorder because the person that sat up was so different than the person that originally sat in her chair. That night, Dr. Beth Derby is having sex with her husband, and she appears disinterested. And in the middle, she has a hallucination that Asa, this college-aged student, is in his place. And it excites her. She becomes absolutely wild. And at the end, her husband is like, holy cow, it's never been like that.
What was that?
And only we know the truth. It had nothing to do with him.
Right.
The next day, she goes to the young man's house and finds the father, and he's very sickly, but he's mean. He doesn't want her there, and he has a book of incantations and drawings, very Evil Dead like.
Yes, I thought the same thing. Evil Dead came to mind. Yeah.
It's got those same, drawings that look like they might be written in blood.
Yeah.
But and as he's yelling at her, telling her she has to leave, he pulls a knife and he cuts her, and her blood drips on the book and seeps into the pages. Again, very very familiar thing that we've seen before, but
Yep.
handled a little bit differently. The next day, Asa shows up again at her office. This time, he interrupts a hypnosis, which she completely bails on the middle of, leaves the poor guy in a hypnotic state.
Yeah, I thought that part was pretty funny because he's like his fist is like shaking, and she's like, "Oh, let me get the door," and she like turns around, it's like, I should probably get him out of the state. But
Yeah.
she is so enamored. She's like, you can tell there's some kind of like enamored, like she's possessed by this the idea of this guy, that she just feels compelled to go to talk to him. It's interesting.
I think, she thinks his case could be, clinically groundbreaking, but then she also had fantasies about him. So there's like a double pull there that
Exactly.
has her
Yeah.
interest. Well, she goes back in to relieve the guy from his hypnosis. She tells him to wait, but she comes back out and he's gone. So she goes to his house, and now the father's there, and he appears to be on the doorstep of death. They actually think he's dead. Asa thinks he's dead and says, "We got to cut the brain out of the body. We got to destroy the brain. We got to burn the body." And she's like, "No, no, 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 you're going to get."
She's like, "Where's his medication?" She's like, "Screw his medication. We got to kill him."
Yeah, and he's not quite dead because the old man manages to speak the incantations and switches places with Asa again, leaving poor Asa in the dying husk of the old man. Well, we know the personality change. He's now aggressive again, and he starts coming on to her very strongly.
Yeah.
And they actually have sex. During the intercourse, somehow they seem to drift into each other's bodies. They both experience intercourse from the alternative sex. And
yeah, it's almost like the concept of like an incubus or a succubus, right? Like, because like in demonology, a succubus or an incubus is like a demon that takes the form of a man or woman and tries to impregnate either a woman, and then tries to give birth to more demons, right? So that's that concept in demonology, and they kind of use that here. It's basically like some kind of demon is being able to transfer its body by having sex with someone. That was how I perceived it.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Once they're finished, she is upset and confused, but the person who we don't really know, but the drifter character, the body thief who's in Asa's body, really liked being a woman and wants to switch again. We find Asa is still alive. He's gurgling in the near dead body of the old man, begging for help. But the person who has taken over Asa's body severs the head in a shower of blood and then just holds it up triumphantly, and then sets a little fire in the house and just lets it go.
And I'll say this for this movie, as weird as it was, there's some great kill scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beth at this point runs to her friend Danny and starts telling her what's going on, but Danny doesn't believe it any more than Beth believed Asa when he was telling her, which it's not a believable thing, right?
No
one
nothing in Lovecraft,
nothing
in Lovecraft lore is believable. Everyone's always crazy when they tell a story, right?
Yeah, for sure. Beth goes home and admits to her husband on Danny's advice, tells him that she had sex with a patient, and apologizes and says, I'm no good. I need some time, and leaves. She goes to her office, and while there, she dreams of Asa showing up. And of course, they have, in the dream, they have sex again. And then she envisions him changing into the old man and then falling out of the window.
Yeah, like his head looks up, and it's the old man. It's just
Yeah.
really cringy.
And so she wakes up from the dream disturbed. And the
Well, she doesn't she fall back, and she falls out of the window. She gets scared, falls out of the window, and then she falls to the ground, and then wakes up in her bed.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yep. Yep, you're right. I was thinking the old man fell, but you're 100% right. She gets a call at this point from the being that's inside Aza's body. He calls her and he says the words over the phone,
yeah.
and they switch places, but he had smartly handcuffed Aza's body in the basement to a metal pole. So Beth is now trapped in that young man's body and locked to a pole, completely helpless. The thing that is now in Beth's body goes back to her house and has crazy wild sex with her husband and gets ridiculously drunk.
And he loves it.
Yeah, and yeah, both do. Both love it.
Yeah.
Well, Beth at least has the phone that the thing called her with, so she calls Danny for help. But of course, she's speaking in Aza's voice, so she has to ask for help, but try not to say it in the first person and try to convince her. Well, Danny shows up and, of course, finds the boy locked up instead of Beth. And she tries to tell her things to convince her that it's her, like things, secrets that she'd shared in the past.
Right.
And all she says is, wow, she shouldn't have told you that. Like she's not buying it.
Yeah.
And before he starts to tell her one more thing, but before she can successfully convince her, they switch back. And then Danny leaves just confused at who this kid is. He, of course, had hidden the key, so he knew how to get himself out, but Beth wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
The thing in Aza's body shows up again at Beth's office, and she says, as soon as he starts to speak, she's jumping out of the window. And he's like, okay, you think you're threatening me? Here. He gives her the long knife that he used previously and says to go ahead and kill him. And she smartly hypnotizes him. And while he's hypnotized, she buries the knife right in the middle of his forehead, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a good scene.
Then they struggle, and she manages to push him out of the window, and he falls a long way and splats. It's a messy landing.
It's another cool kill. There's some definitely. It actually gets better.
Yeah. So she goes to leave, and she sees the body is gurgling and alive. And so probably my favorite scene of the movie.
Same. I know where we're going with this.
She backs over him with her car several times, and you keep getting an awesome view of the backup camera as it just moves forward and just continues to just mangle this guy's head.
And I have never seen this in a movie, and I thought it was super creative for as far as direction and cinematography. I was like, wow, that is really creative. Well done.
Yeah, I thought that was cool. It was my favorite scene of the movie.
I agree. That was the one that made me like really smile and go, wow, that's a brilliant way to use that camera. You know.
So she thinks, okay, I finally got it, and still, the being in Ace's body opens his eyes, and so she takes the long knife and she gets over it, and she just starts stabbing it over and over and over and over and over.
Mad,
like
she's
crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
And until the cops arrive and arrest her. And this is how she got in the hospital, where she's now retelling all of this to her friend Danny.
Right back to the same thing as in the Mouth of Madness, right? Go right back to it. Yeah.
Yep. In the beginning, there's a cool scene where the body is in the morgue, and there's an exchange between the guy in the morgue and Danny, and she says, "Oh, it's not one of mine," and he says, well, "They're all mine eventually."
Yeah,
which I thought was a great line. So we
was a good
realized
line.
that
Yeah.
not only is Beth in the padded room, but that body, that mangled body that she stabbed and backed over and threw out a window, is in the coroner's office. And everyone thinks it's dead. And Beth is saying, you got to get rid of the brain. You got to destroy the brain. And she's like, I was down there. That thing's dead. The mangled body in the morgue manages to open its eyes and meekly say the words, and the switch takes place again.
Yeah.
So now Beth is in the padded room, but it's not Beth anymore. It's whoever this original character
this
is.
being, yeah.
Yeah, traveling from body to body.
I think it's like an octopus demon, because at one point in the movie, when he's downstairs, when he's locked up, he sees this like mangled flesh thingy, and above it is, you see this like sign of like an octopus demon, like some very Lovecraftian, right?
Yeah, a
And
drawing of a Lovecraftian creature. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's what this thing is.
So now we know this personality. Now in Beth's body, it starts coming on to Danny very aggressively. And it's like, okay, this is
Kisses her and
really
stuff.
weird.
Yeah, yeah.
It actually becomes, as the movie finishes, it becomes hard to keep track of who's in what body, which
Yeah,
I think plays perfectly into the madness and confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Beth, inside this mangled corpse, this mangled body that everybody thought was dead, is crawling down the hall, the bloody carcass just dragging behind her, leaving just a trail of blood and body fluids.
Yeah.
And she gets in the middle of Danny and Beth are now in the hallway fighting, and the being switches into Danny's body. And so now Danny is stuck in Beth's body. And this is where it starts to get all confusing.
The whole thing's wonky. Yeah, it's just
he
like,
grabs a gun from the security guard. The guard gets shot. The carcass is shot in the head. And now we know Beth was actually in that carcass at that time. So Beth is actually now eliminated.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, her body's still alive, but Danny's stuck in it.
Right. Yeah. It's at this point, I'm scratching my head watching the movie, like, all right.
Yeah. So the being keeps going back and forth between the two bodies as they struggle and fight. Can you imagine fighting with someone and the minute you think you gain upper control, you're the other person? It's maddening.
Maddening. Yeah.
We see the two women struggling, unsure who was who, and Beth ends up locked up in the insane asylum, and Danny gets to continue on with her life. But we know Beth isn't Beth. So the question we have at this point is, did Danny manage to get away, or is Danny stuck in Beth's body in the madhouse? And we get the answer at the end. We kind of get the answer.
Kinda. Yeah.
Because in the Danny's in her office, she goes on with her life, but at her desk, she rolls up a homemade smoke exactly the way this body traveler had been doing in every body he was. So we know it's one for now.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was some really cool, Miskatonic Medical School, which Miskatonic University was where Reanimator took place.
Yep.
The morgue in the hallway, the whole entrance to it were very reminiscent of the morgue and Reanimator.
Yeah.
It's a fun movie. It's an interesting movie. Some of the CGI for 2023 release didn't look great. There was, like, when she stuck him in the forehead with the knife.
Very sci-fi channel. Yeah.
It looked a little wonky, and I'm thinking, man, Tom Savini was sticking people in the head with a knife for real in the 80s, and it looked perfect.
Yeah, and which is interesting because they had some scenes that were good, like the head decapitation was done well, right? I mean, they did some stuff that was really well done. They did some stuff that was really choppy. They had some pacing that was good, and they had some pacing that was just like rushed, So this movie kind of like it's a little rocky, it's a little bumpy, but overall, I think it's fun. I think it's creative. It's very intense, that's for sure.
It is, yeah. It's an interesting story. I thought Barbara Crampton, was top notch. She played her role perfectly.
Yes.
She looks fantastic for however old she is.
Yeah.
I actually thought there were some moments that I thought Heather Graham did not come across that well. I thought, I like her, but there were moments where I said, man, that's not great. That's not like, great acting.
I don't know if it was forced or calling it in, or there was times when it was a little like, And
she's one of the producers on the movie, so you wouldn't think she'd be calling it in. But I'm not knocking the movie. I'm not knocking the participants. It was a fun movie. It was a blast. I'd always wanted to see it. I was glad to watch it.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. It's a fun movie. If you want to watch something strange, bizarre, fun, brutal, intense, this movie packs a punch.
For my money, the top two Lovecraft based horror movies are still Reanimator, a film we've covered on this
Oh yeah.
show, and From Beyond, which would have been a great fit in this category, both directed by the late, great Stuart Gordon. But to me, those two still stand out as the best of the Lovecraft horror. But these two were also very, very good and certainly fit the mold.
Yeah, I think we'll have to pick From Beyond at some point and throw that into a category.
Yeah, fantastic movie.
Yeah.
But that's our topic this week: Lovecraft legacy, and the legacy is a long, strong, and deep one. It's
going to go on forever.
influential throughout horror
Yeah.
since the early 1900s, and there's not a ton of great movies because of the psychological and non-physical nature of some of the stories. But some people have tried it, some people have done it well, and these are two pretty good ones.
Yeah, I agree. It's very tough to take what Lovecraft writes and then put that into something tangible for an hour and a half on screen. You know, with the way. I mean, if you've read his stuff, when you're reading it, it's like, yeah, how do you?
Right.
You know, it's like trying to make. It's like reading Revelations in the Bible and then making that a movie. It's like, well, this is a hallucinogenic nightmare. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
Yeah. Any image you make isn't going to do justice to the words on
So
the
to
page.
the words, yeah, yeah.
But you can do your best, and like I said, a couple of really good examples.
Yep.
All right. Well, from Lovecraft, we slide into love.
Yeah.
As next week we brings us to Valentine's Day, and we're going to talk about some love that doesn't work out.
Which often it doesn't. So it'll be very fitting.
Absolutely. Well, that's our show for this week. We are the Weekly Horoscope. I'm Jerry. That's Matt, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.